Hi, I'm Larry Leach, proud Executive Director of 12 Community Safety Initiative and host of the Meet Your Neighbors series. During the pandemic, we held a number of sessions over Zoom aimed at learning more about the diverse cultures and people in our communities. Our guest panelists were asked a series of 4 questions directed at identifying some of the challenges they face, what supports could help, and how those of us in our communities can welcome newcomers into our neighborhoods. Meet Your Neighbors series gives us a closer look at each of the sessions and the wonderful guest panelists that we had in our diversity series. We've also included some of our participants in the series with their insightful questions and comments. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoy Meet Your Indigenous Neighbors. And so now I have this distinct pleasure of introducing my former boss, Cam Stewart. Now, Cam is the former co-chair at 12 CSI. He's also been working with us on this fabulous committee to put together these sessions. He's also a former Calgary police officer. And recently, I had the honor to watch a ceremony where my friend Cam was given a Blackfoot name, and his name is Red Morning. And behind him, you'll actually see the blanket he was given. So without further ado, Mr. Cam Stewart.
Thanks, Larry, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining. It's whenever I host a meeting, and not just about this issue, but any issue, I really encourage people to have a treaty acknowledgement. And so I'd like to acknowledge, for those you don't know, that we're on Treaty 7 territory, and that's traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nations. That includes Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations. We also acknowledge all the many First Nations and Métis and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. We also acknowledge all the nations, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who work, live, and play to create a welcoming, inclusive place for all in this territory. And I think that's an important part is as we move forward, we acknowledge the past, but we also acknowledge all the people, including those here that come from many lands to make this the best place in the world.
Tremendous. Thank you, Cam. And without further ado, we'll ask Elder Doreen Spence to open with some words and about her experiences.
My sacred name is Bald Eagle Woman Who Leads. I am from the Saddle Lake Reservation. I've lived in Calgary here since 1970. My husband was in the forces, so we got posted here from Toronto. And I'm 83. I am very much engaged in my community. Because I attended Mount Royal, was one of the first people to help initiate and put in the Aboriginal educational program into Mount Royal. So I have a great deal of experience here in Calgary, because when I first moved here, there was a 98% dropout rate of Indigenous students in the school system. There were 7 suicides in 1 month, and it just broke my heart. And so I was very instrumental in putting PICS together, the Plains Indians Cultural Survival School, and was the president of the school for 18 years. And then I went to Africa and did a school over there and came back and initiated the Canadian Indigenous Women's Resource Institute here in Calgary and run that for 13 years. I'm still really active internationally as well. I still sit on many committees and was on the International Elders Council out of New Zealand for many years and still help them every now and again. So that's kind of a little bit about my work.
Very much appreciate it. I'm looking forward to some of the answers later on the questions, but we'll move on to Colby and ask him to share some of his thoughts about his experiences.
My name is Colby Delorme. My Cree name is Sistimau Napio. That's Tobacco Man. Um, I'm from Manitoba. I was born in Winnipeg, and my family is from the Red River Valley. I'm deeply rooted in Métis culture and history in Canada. I've been self-employed since the age of 18, so I've been working in Calgary and across Canada for a number of years. I'm in my 27th year of being self-employed now. My mother and I moved to Calgary in 1985. So Calgary definitely is home for us now. In terms of a city that comes together from a volunteer standpoint and working with one another, we're a city in the world that per capita is very well respected for the amount of volunteerism that we do. And I have found that to be one of the most beneficial things for me. I believe that that giving is one of the best things I can do, and it's really it's a selfish pursuit for me. I get more out of it than I think I'm able to give. One of the things that it's tough because I think it's a negative, but it's becoming more positive. When I moved here in '85, it was blatantly obvious that there was very little diversity in Calgary. And it was the first time that I had ever experienced a lack of inclusion. You know, the positive part of that is if I look at where our city is at over the last 25 years, it is amazing, the cultural makeup of our city. And obviously, you know, as Doreen said, we have a long ways to go, but you know, it's things like this that, you know, we can see that there's some progression. That's something about Calgary that I feel blessed to be a part of the journey because it's one that we'll be talking about for a long time. So, thank you.
Thanks, Colby. So now we're going to get into these four questions, and I'll let either one of you decide who's going to jump in first or second. What do you think some of the issues and concerns that you feel that members of your community are facing?
Want to go first, Doreen?
For me, it's lack of education. You know, as an Indigenous person, I do have my Bachelor of Nursing and that, which I received a few years ago from Mount Royal University. And as a healer, as a traditional healer, it's important that awareness is where we must start, and education. You know, I walk into a room where most of the time I see a lot about Black Lives Matters. I see a lot about other cultures. I experience that on a daily basis. But what's missing are the Indigenous people, the first people of this land. History has to be taught, and that has to be taught right from early child intervention right on through post-secondary education. And I believe our Premier had said that they were going to be cutting the curriculum. They were supposed to be teaching history, Indigenous history, and I believe they're talking of cutting that out in the schools. So it's important that people really advocate for learning the true history of this country and learning about the people that lived here initially. Because I've come through a Holocaust. I call it the North American Holocaust. And, you know, I see genocide happening every day. It still is very much alive. And so to me, education is where it must begin.
I think this is a cultural issue in Canada. This is something where Canadians have either chosen or decided to not adopt Indigenous culture in Canada as Canada's culture. It is a simple act of even doing that that creates this reconciliation between our nation and my people. I think a lot of times people in Canada believe that Indigenous people are saying, we want all of our land back. Some of us say that, some of us say that. But what people don't realize is that Indigenous people have never felt that they own the land. We were stewards of the land, and we continue to be stewards of the land. But if we were to get to a point where there was just this true equality, then we would get over so many of these barriers that are here. And in a city like Calgary, in a province like Alberta, you know, especially being such a conservative place politically, you know, I think it's starting to turn a little bit, but we still have some pretty deep conservative roots. I don't think we've got the political makeup to be able to sort of come and meet halfway or to invoke that kind of equality.
Thanks, Colby. I go to the second question. The second question is, what kind of support would you want for your community members? And who wants to start first?
I can start. I'm the past chair of Muscunawa. Now, that's an organization in Calgary that works with our Indigenous families and youth, doing the social work for children's services. So this is very difficult work, very controversial work for Indigenous people. One of the things that our CEO at Muscunawa talks about is the practice of culturally appropriate programming and social services. Through the act of using culturally appropriate models, you know, our families feel that we are truly working with them, trying to be proactive, trying to ensure that, you know, these extreme measures are not employed and used upon them, and when they are used, that they are not working within a model that is completely debilitating. I think that there's other organizations, other service sectors that could learn from employing these strategies of culturally appropriate services.
Anything to add, Elder Doreen?
We've always had to think outside the box. We've always had to be forced to learn other people's culture and traditions and honor and respect them. But what I always found sad was they knew nothing about our culture, which really is the foundation of Canada and North America on a global scale. We're very much honored when we travel to other countries, like in Europe. People just will book solid to just have an opportunity of talking to you and access the wisdom and that while you're there. And so for me, it's learning the culture. And there's such a difference between Cree language and English. Like there's a lot of words in Cree that you cannot just say, interpret one way. Kisuatsuin, for instance. Kisuatsuin is a way of being. It's a way of living upon the planet, of cohabitating with everything that is upon the planet. And that's when we say, that's when you're walking in balance and harmony and mindfulness, is when you learn to walk with Kisuatsuin, walking in a good way. And I'd like to hear Cam's take on this too, because Cam, I've been mentoring him for a few years now, so he knows both worlds. And I think he'd have a lot to add to this too as well. Hi.
Yeah, I've been blessed to work and learn by many elders. I've been very honored to participate in 2 fast vision quests with grandmother. And those are some of the highlights of my life, both spiritually and intellectually. To me, it's about cultural appreciation instead of appropriation. And really, it's not up to Indigenous people to teach us about them. Plain and simple. It's about us to learn, to ask the questions, to listen to the knowledge keepers, and I think this is a good opportunity for people here is to ask those questions and listen to the stories.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So, how do you think community associations can reach you or members of your community in order to be involved and participate?
You know, this is understanding that we are all on the same journey and we're all trying to get people to a state of sustainability and lives that we would all be happy to be in. But I think the front door of our organizations with our name is the greatest barrier. And for some reason, we have a difficult time saying, well, I'm from another one with a different name on the door. I don't know if I'm allowed to go through that door. I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm doing a consulting project, and part of what I had to do was go interview not-for-profits. Well, I had no problem. I even asked them, I said, do you mind sharing all your documentation on how you did that? And they look at me for a second, they say, yeah, we could share that, you know, but it's almost like no one's ever taken the opportunity of even asking. And there's a group that doesn't feel that they need to protect their intellectual property. They truly understand that everyone who has funded them is the people of Alberta. We all own the information. We all own these things collectively. So I think we need to get over ourselves and go and talk to one another and see what things are similar and how we can learn from one another.
Thanks, Colby. Anything to add, Elder Doreen?
I thank you for that, Colby. I know that we have many similarities in terms of running organizations and institutions like that within our communities. These organizations are losing out that don't have Indigenous people, because I'll give you an example. I had a young man who came to me with potential suicide, highly suicidal. So I started to do the traditional way of counseling, not the way that I was taught in nursing. Because in nursing, they teach you a specific way, but I used a traditional way. And I talked to this young man for some time, and he said, yes, I went through every door, and yes, I know how to manipulate and I know how to control. He said, and yes, you're right. I will go from here and I'll go to Mount Royal and I will register for post-secondary. That young man, 3 years later, brought a big bouquet of flowers to my office to thank me. This is just one experience of many that I work with within the community. So each of the organizations, if they don't learn about the culture and how to work with their clients, they're not doing anyone a favor. So it's imperative to learn the culture and the traditions. And the only way to do that is to access the leaders like Colby. That's the best way to do that.
And that dovetails beautifully into my last question, because I'm going to scrap the last question because you brought up a more important question. Exactly what you're talking about, Elder Spence, is what I'm going to ask about. Is where would you recommend somebody start their journey to learn? And maybe I'll ask Cam as well to join in on this one.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't learn necessarily well on books or by going videos, but it's building those relationships. and finding out who our neighbors are. It's talking to people, because again, there's, as much as we have two great resources here at our conversation today, there's 50,000 other Indigenous people in this city that you can get to know. We have to not be afraid of the other, and I think that's the big thing that people are afraid of. You know, how much difference the Indigenous people, our First Nations people and cultures, they're not that much different than in their dreams and their wishes aren't that much different than anyone here.
Anything to add, Elder Doreen?
I guess for me, the most important thing is to share the fact that there are many online courses. Like you take the University of Alberta, they have an online course which is free. And, you know, it's really a worthwhile course to learn. Dan Levy took it, and he really said that it was the best course he ever took. So, you know, if it's good for Dan Levy, it must be good for everybody. Anyway, every opportunity you get, you know, to really learn, especially from the elders and people like Colby, because they're our next set of elders. They're the ones that are being primed to step into the role of an elder in the next generation of elders. It's important to seek them out and, you know, befriend them, become friends and learn from them. So rather than learn a new language, it's time to learn a new culture. So I implore you to do that, to reach out to us.
That was fantastic. But we'll move on to Colby.
To Cam's statement, I completely agree. We are not different. None of us are different. We all do the same things. We all need the same things. And we all just do them in just a slightly different way. When I think about the easiest way to adopt a culture, I think it, at least where society is now, I believe it comes through the delivery of culture. If you were asked to go and learn about the Renaissance painters, artists, the likelihood is you're not going to read a book. You're not going and taking an art history class to learn that. You're more likely to go to the Louvre or to go somewhere and go experience the art. So for me, it's not something I'm going to get tomorrow. I know that. It's too rich. It's tens of thousands of years old. It's far too rich to learn quickly. So I'm going to go and I'm going to wait till my elder feels that it's appropriate to tell me about this and teach me about that. And, so I can do that. And I can sit and I can watch and I can listen to the elder, and I can listen to the elder multiple times and get a better sense of really what that elder is trying to say. Or I'm lucky enough that I've been able to work with Indigenous artists. And Indigenous artists typically reflect culture. And my good late friend, Dr. Delorme, he, if you look at his paintings, even when he and I started working together, I don't think I understood all that he was painting about. But it wasn't until I started sweating that I understood what the picture was that Dale was depicting. And I think we all can learn that way. And you take it a little bit at a time and you listen to the language a little bit at a time. And it's that sort of slow burn into it that you start getting this deep respect for how rich a culture is. But I think through cultural, visual cultural things, I think is a very easy way. And, even maybe watching APTN, watch some shows on APTN, maybe not when they show the movie Speed, but they're showing all the Indigenous stuff. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much. I'll also put a little plug in for our Indigenous Reads Book Club, which happens every month. And you can get some information on 12csi.ca under resources. And they read different books by Indigenous authors. And there's been a lot of great discussion there. So I'll put a little plug in for that. So if somebody in the group has a question that we haven't touched on, maybe type it in the chat and I'll ask it. Could you maybe explain to the group about smudging and its importance to your culture?
It's absolutely critical for me. It's something that a very much part of my life. I use a smudge, which represents our 4 directions, our sacred grandfathers, the 4 winds, the 4 animals from the 4 directions, all those energies that share with us every day. They have been there since time immemorial. And these medicines help me ground and root and be in my heart space, the space that I need to be in order to serve my community. And so smudging to me is critical. So whether a person is familiar with it or not, I really feel it's critical. It's critical for me to open up in a good way, to call on the ancestors, to call the spirits to guide us in our journey.
Thank you for that. Devin also asks, she loves the idea of Indigenous culture being Canadian culture, but how do we as white people honor without appropriating?
There's a misconception in North America around appropriation of culture and tradition, and believing that Indigenous people are not welcome. If you understood anything about Indigenous culture, you'd know that it's a very inviting culture. It is amazing to me when I watch elders like Doreen go out of their way to teach non-Indigenous people our ways and our ways of knowing. And I wish that people understood that, because if you actually went and sought knowledge, sought understanding, you would be given the rights and there wouldn't be an issue of appropriation. And that's what I don't think people understand. It's that, our colors, our culture, our ceremonial practices, our names, our headdresses, our regalia, all of that, every single thing, there's a reason why it's done, the way it's done, how it's done, what time of year it's done. I treat it with such respect that I don't even ask my elder why or how. I wait until he teaches me. But I can tell you that every sweat, there's something that happens in a very specific order, and I don't always know why it's occurring and for what reason. But what I do know is the people who do know and the people who follow those particular protocols, the only reason why they have them is because they were taught and afforded the right to be able to use them, implement them, practice them. And even for Indigenous people, you're not supposed to do certain things until you've been given the right. So there's a reason why appropriation is so deliberately hurtful towards Indigenous people, because it's just a whole practice, it's a way of living. And when you haven't been given those teachings, you don't understand why something is used in that way or done in that way. So appropriation is a very big issue. And we're not the only culture that has an issue with appropriation, but this has been deeply rooted in North American culture. And we see much of the culture of North America built on and started with this whole cowboys and Indians idea and this beginning of appropriation.
Thanks, Colby. All right, well, we'll wrap things up now. And so maybe we'll start with Cam and then move along.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to take up time of our distinguished guests, but I again just thank them immensely. And so thanks again, Grandmother Doreen and Colby.
I just want to thank everyone for taking the opportunity to join and to allow us to speak with you and to share about our culture. You know, I think that's all Indigenous people are really asking for, is just for a moment to be heard, to be understood, and you know, to create, you know, some connection. It's great that people are willing to spend some of their Saturday doing that. So I thank all of you.
Thank you, Colby. Elder Doreen?
I'm just so honored to have this opportunity to come and share. It's always such a blessing for me to have people in a circle like this of like mind and of like interest. And now is the time to really take that opportunity to go within and really rethink our values and reestablish those values and help heal our communities. And we can't do it in isolation of each other. We have to do it as a collective. And so I thank you for attending today and listening to our stories. Hi, all my relations.
Grandmother, this is one of the first of many discussions. Can I ask you to send us off in a good way?
I can. Hauksina peokestimantu kaksiwatsian. Nunenaskum nanoskami kiskak nuhtauinan. Magnaunan minan maskuatsuan minan misuan. Magnau vikahianoaku maganak wistawa quist neopite. Yakuse nunenaskum now. Hi, all my relations.
Thank you. And with that, I thank everyone for coming, and what a wonderful way to end it. Thank you.